said, my name's Schermerhorn. I grew up here in Bellingham. I've lived here most of my life, except for 5 years where I went nuts and lived in Skagit County. Got my brains back, came back to Whatcom County. So I'm happy to be up here. My family all lives up here, and we've all been part of the community for a long time. My interest in models goes back a long time. I've been building models since I can't remember when now. And I'm sure quite a few of you have probably built models. Who here has actually built models? How many of you think you built a model? Okay, that's fine. No, it's all good. It's all good. Model making is an old art. It is nothing new. It goes way back to ancient times. The reason modelers became important in history was very simple. I want to build something. How big is it, and what's it going to look like? Well, in the old times, back when there was just a piece of chalk on a wall, you drew a picture and somebody says, yep, that looks like that. Well, you can't really tell what's there. And the best way to tell what's there is something in 3 dimensions. So they started getting smart. They started building things that make a scale model of a house, a boat, even a log boat. They'd make a small model just to prove that it would work. In fact, I brought tonight what I believe to be the very first model boat ever built. It's rolled. It took a long time to restore it, and I'm sure most of you might have even seen one of these before. It looks like this. Classic lines, a little wet yet, but yes, classic boat, because at some point in time in history, somebody decided, I'm here, I want to go over there. How do I do that? Well, there's your first model. He's sitting there on the bank one day. Here comes this thing floating. He's like, ooh, I could get on something like that, maybe bigger, and maybe get over there and not get wet. Thus, the first model boat was ever built, or at least seen. I wasn't there. I cannot provide accurate proof that was the case, but it is all speculation, and, well, nobody can prove me wrong yet. So that's how model boats kind of started. As you move forward in history, you get into the more modern times, the 16th, 17th, 18th centuries, they started building these elaborate models for the kings and queens. I'm going to throw all this gold at something. I want to see what it looks like. Well, the designer says it's going to look great. It's going to be beautiful. It's going to be the best thing you've ever seen. Oh, hold on, that's somebody else. They wanted to see what they were spending their money on. And they would build a model, and they get a representation of what they think it's going to look like. This had a couple of benefits. One, they knew what their money was going towards. And two, the guys building the boat, designing the boat, could actually see what they're trying to achieve. They'd actually use that model to take offsets off of, or drawings, or measurements to apply towards the real boat. That made it easier to go by instead of saying, the architect said it should be here, but I don't see it. If you could do this, you could transfer it over, you saw what you were building, it made it much easier. And that process really has not changed to this day. The techniques may have changed, the materials may have changed, but the reality is it's still the same basic idea that's been around for about 400 years. So we're going to jump forward a bit now, because the past is the past. Modern model building, which is what I kind of got into, is a very interesting time. I don't have to work as hard at it as some people. There's a lot of stuff out there that makes my job a lot easier to build models. Still time consuming. I still got to do a lot of work, but it's made it easier. In building models, the older days, it used to be out of wood, maybe some string, and some simple cloth. Most of those boats are static type models nowadays. They're designed to sit on a shelf and look pretty, very nicely done, make your imagination go wild. Like if you're on that sailing vessel, I'm traveling the 7 seas, seeing the world, glamorous life. But the models I like to do aren't the old models like that. I prefer to look at models that are a little more modern, because that's the time I live in. And when I say modern, I'm talking 1800s, 1850s to present day. Why? Well, like I said, that's what I live in. That's what I can see. That's what I have access to. It's also because my models aren't just models. These are toys. Most people build a model and put it on a shelf. I build my models and put them in the water and play. The models you see before you today are all radio controlled, which means I stand on the shore while they go out there and do their thing, and I hope they come back. I've got stories where that doesn't happen. I've got witnesses. Unfortunately, they are present today. Excuse me. So, this is my journey. So I started building models as a kid. My first boat model was probably a plastic model, probably of a little tugboat, a battleship, maybe the Arizona. I can't remember. I built a lot of them. And unfortunately, they met a terrible fate come the 4th of July as a teenager. I just call it replicating history. Maybe not accurately, but it was replicated in quite glorious fashion. But as I got older, I started, by my late teens, I started thinking, I'm putting a lot of money and time into these things to do what? I kind of want to hang on to these now, because also it was my money I'm spending on these, and it didn't look as good being burned up that way. So my first real model boat for radio control was actually just a little sailboat, about this big, by a company called Dumas. I built it, I tried sailing it, put it on a shelf and left it there. So it wasn't as exciting as I thought it would be. It didn't work as good as I thought it would because I was new to the hobby and didn't understand it. Now, to understand why that wouldn't make sense, I have a very well-known uncle in this area who is very well-known for flying radio-controlled airplanes and helicopter. He was kind of the guru in this area. So for me to fail at something RC was kind of like, oh boy, nobody believed it would happen. But I learned from him, as well as many other people I met along this trip. I started building a little more complex models. Now I'm going to put a motor in it and make it go. First models were gas-powered. That worked. That was well known. That's what we used. Got most of my parts from the good old Hobby Hive here in town. If you've been here long enough, you know where that was at. Just a little hole in the wall behind what's now Rite Aid downtown. Greatest place in the world as a kid. That was my first really moving boat that worked. So I decided, well, let's take it a little farther. So we started building a little bigger boats. Okay, so hydroplanes. That looks pretty cool. But it's something there, and it's going to go really fast. Because as a teenager and a young man, there's nothing more important about how fast can you make something go. And I made them go really fast, and you know what? They sank just as fast. So I got a little discouraged and decided, well, my own fly airplanes, I can fly airplanes. So I did airplanes. But then there's this little thing called gravity. And every airplane has at least one landing. It may be a good landing, or it may be a final landing, but they all have one landing, and most of mine were not happy landings. So I got into RC cars. Now, that's kind of fun to go in circles for a while. But then I started racing, and I found that the guys racing were really arrogant, snotty, unfriendly. Then I looked in the mirror and said, oh crud, that's me. I didn't want to go that direction. So by the time I'm 20, I'm now looking at model boats seriously because I attended a little event out in Linda called RC Combat. Now I know I've talked about building them to make them float and everything else. These guys are building boats to go out, run boats, and shoot BBs at each other and try to sink the other guy. And I want to get into this. This looks cool. That was my first entrance into real scale modeling. Having learned how to judge scale, what it meant. In that case, scale there meant that 1 inch equaled 12 feet, more commonly known as 1/144 scale. You start learning a lot of math. All this math I thought was useless in school, I finally found a good use for as a hobbyist. So I started building these warships. It wasn't that exciting because as I got into it, the guys that were doing it got out of it. But that's when I learned about a group out of Seattle called the Northwest RC Ship Modelers. I saw them down at Hobby Expo in Puyallup, which was, as a hobbyist, this was paradise. Once a year, the world of hobbies comes to the Pacific Northwest to show us their wears, their tears, and get into this, get into that, and spend lots of money, and you'll have fun. And I met these guys. They were friendly, they were encouraging, and I liked what I saw. I wanted to do more of this. So I started building. That was my venture into scale modeling started there. And that was about 1988. The result, boat number 3 that I built at scale is now sitting in the room next door, and it's called the Moon Shadow. That was my first real attempt at a real scale boat. And most of that was based off a kit that I changed and modified to make it look like something you see in the Pacific Northwest. One of my mantras with my models, they have to have a connection to the Pacific Northwest. I do not want to build a European fishing boat. I do not want a German U-boat. I do not want something from the East Coast even. I want something that represents my part of the world. Why? Most hobbyists, most guys who do models are history people. We like history. That's why we're modeling what we model, whether it be cars, tanks, planes, boats, dirigibles, science fiction. We like something in history. That's why we model what we do. So that's why models you see in front of you represent things that if you've been out on the water or around the port here in Puget Sound, you've probably seen something like it or similar to it. All these models have a connection to Bellingham, which sometimes is real hard to do as a hobbyist. It's tough to connect to an area unless you've got an active port and a waterfront. It's tough to have access to stuff to understand it. I'm lucky that I've lived here long enough, between here in Skagit County and even Seattle, have access to things that allow me to see things that others don't, so I can build the models I do. So modeling things in the Pacific Northwest, there's a ton of stuff to do. And I hear this quite often. Why don't you build this boat? Yeah, that'd be great. Oh, hey, why don't you build that boat? Oh, yeah, that'd be cool. Why don't you build this? No, that's an ugly boat. The reality is there's so many projects, and people that know me will tell you I've got a lot of projects that started, that aren't finished, because you see one and you get excited. You want to build this boat. You want to represent something in this area, because it reminds me of the history that I saw growing up. And some of the history is before my time, but a lot of it is current. So the models that you see before you, these are all working models. As I said before, they do get wet, they do get moved, they do get handled, and they do compete. Some of these are award winners, some of them haven't done as well, but most of them have done okay. I'm pretty proud of that fact. In doing this, a static modeler just puts everything together, puts it together solid, and puts it on a shelf and never has to think about it. As a radio controlled modeler, I have to do a little more thinking. You have to think about how you put things together. How are you going to access this? How are you going to hide an access point? How do you keep the water out, not in? All these things you have to do. You have to actually become an engineer when you build a radio controlled model, because you have to think about it's out on the water. This is a scale model. The waves are real. You can't, unfortunately, until someone develops a machine that allows me to go to the lake and just zap it and turn the water into scale molecules, it's full size, and it gets very rough on a model some days. Like I said, I have some that have become unintentional submarines. So, starting with the models up here, I'm going to start with the first boat here in the middle. This is called the Bear. What's important about this boat to our local history? This boat was designed by a gentleman by the name of H.C. Hansen. And if you know anything about the museum here in Bellingham, the museum is now the sole curator of all his drawings of all the boats that he helped draw when he was with Hansen and Coolidge out of Seattle from 1909 till 1972, I believe. Prior to World War II, these guys decided there's a lot of oil probably up north in Alaska. We just got to find out a way to get to it. Well, at the time they're designing this, they decided they're not going to go up the west coast. They're going to go up through the interior. This boat was constructed in halves down in St. Louis. They put the halves on a barge, ran them up the Mississippi River, clear up to Michigan, where they assembled the boat into one piece. The boat's now a working boat. They take the boat across the way up into Canada. You go up the Mackenzie River. Mackenzie River is about the same size as the Mississippi. It's a big, long river that goes clear to the Arctic. Now this is going really good. This is a 74-foot boat, pre-World War II, about 1941, going up the river, and then they hit a little snag. They forgot about halfway up this river, there's about a 20-mile area with these really bad rapids that this boat isn't going to clear. They take the boat out of the water, they load this boat and two others like it onto flatbeds and take them over a mountain pass up to the Great Slave Lake, which is at the other end, where they once again put them back in the water and continued on their journey up there to start exploration for oil. Like I said, kind of an interesting story. I've read the story, I'm like, that'd be a cool model. Sure.
Since it was one of the smaller boats.
Yeah. This is one of the smaller boats at 74 feet. They built two bigger boats that were at 86 feet, not much bigger. The unique thing about this boat is it has what's called a tunnel drive. This boat had to run in very shallow water, so they built these tunnels, these big rudders, and a couple small props, and they just went forward. This boat's not really designed to go backwards, it's designed to go forwards. Kind of like a slow-moving hydroplane. And I can tell you from experience, my model, yeah, it behaved like a real boat. It didn't handle work beans. I have a witness here. I'd like to introduce my good friend Tom here. He's been with me doing model boats for a long time as well with me. And he witnessed one of the slowest runs of me pushing a barge ever. We didn't time it by the hour, we timed it by a calendar. Meanwhile, everybody else that was there competing had gone around 2 or 3 times by the time I made the first turn. But it did win me a really cool jacket from Seaspan International because I managed to finish the course with this boat pushing a 120-pound barge through the water. So, perseverance and believing in the boat, it worked. The next vessel here, if you know anything about our local history, this is what's called an LT. This is one of the large tugs that was built during World War II. These were built at Bellingham shipyards. They built 6 of these boats. The first 4 came off in series. The other 2 came out later on in the war. Built out of solid hemlock. These boats were well-known boats in the maritime industry after the war. This class of boats was called a Mickey class boat. These are world famous. Another friend of mine wrote a really, interesting book called The Forgotten Fleet of 61. They built 61 of these boats during World War II. The history on them is interesting. There are the East Coast boats and the West Coast boats. Ideally, they look the same. My model, I thought I did the right thing and built it the same. So I'm going to confess right here, there is a flaw on this boat. This boat has what's called an East Coast house. The house up here in front is more rounded. The West Coast boats are actually square with a curved radius on the front. That's so they could tell right away which one was East Coast built, which ones were West Coast built. This particular model of the Mickey class is called a Mickey. Why is it a Mickey? Well, the original Mickey was a boat built out of for Hawaiian tug and barge, similar design, a little bit shorter, but similar design, and it was a single screw boat. For those who aren't familiar with maritime terminology, single screw means one prop. The Mickeys have twin screw, which is really good for long range towing. But in tight quarters, they don't handle quite as well because even with the twin screw, you can't drive it like a tractor or a tank because of the way that it's set up, it fights itself. But on a straight run, man, you set this boat, away they go, and they went straight forever. So I'm doing the World War II version of the Mickey. This one does have guns on it. That was the other attraction for doing a World War II version. Most of the time you do a tugboat, it's pretty much a tugboat, lots of neat gear, big, beefy, powerful, but you never see a gun on a tugboat. Well, I mentioned earlier, I'm a competitor. We do have model boat regattas. But this boat gives me a double edge. I can enter as a tugboat, or I can enter it as a military vessel. I got my choices. So that is one of the Mickey Mickeys. Like I said, this one, the particular boat was built here in Bellingham. They survived a long time. They're very hardy boats. One of the stories in the book talks about up in Alaska during a real violent storm, the Coast Guard had to come out and do an emergency, had to run a surgeon out to the boat to do an emergency appendectomy on a crew member. They couldn't get him to shore. The boat's in the harbor. The wind was blowing probably about, they said, 65 to 80 miles an hour. Not a real great place to want to be cutting on somebody on a calm day. They had no choice. They put the nose of the boat into the wind, and the surgeon said he's never had a more stable platform to work from. These were heavy boats. It took a lot to move them around in the dead water like that, even in moving water. So they just went to the testament of the design and the build of these boats, how well they were for survivability. Foss Maritime, Crowley Maritime, all had these boats in their use. This particular boat, after World War II, was bought by a Canadian company. The boat it became was the poster child for Canadian towing for up until about the 1970s. Lots of power, well built, could tow everything and anything and do the job and get it done well. So it's a great boat. That's why I've got a model of one of these. Like I said, local history, local boats. The next big tugboat. Most of you might have seen this or one of the sister ships in it. This is one of the Foss boats. This here is the Weedle. What makes this boat unique? It looks big, got lots of tires, looks like a tugboat. But if you look closely, there's no props on this boat. There is now, but I'll explain that one here in a minute. Foss Maritime, back in the mid-'80s, realized that these style boats are not going to be effective anymore. They need something that's going to be more competitive to work in the harbors. They need something that's going to work to pull the tankers around out here. These things won't stop a tanker. There's certain things you can't do with this, they do with tankers, especially nowadays, you wouldn't want to do on this boat. So they came up, they just went to Germany where they were running boats similar to this. This style of boat is called a Voith boat. This is the Weedle. She's one of 5 boats that Foss had built with the Voith drives. Now, Voith drive, if you look forward up here, you see those paravanes hanging down. That is a Voith drive. That has another connection to the Pacific Northwest. Back in 1920, Professor Kirsten of the University of Washington said, traditional systems work, but what if we took and hung some blades like this vertically and spun them? Can we move? It works in a blender. Why won't it work on a boat? So they actually built a boat. It was about a 35-foot tugboat. It had about 300 horsepower to it that day, which was quite a bit. And they built the system, they put it on there, and they drove it. And they proved it would work. But it wasn't very efficient. There's a lot of wasted energy. They didn't translate into motion, power, pulling power, pushing power. So they kind of let that boat go by the wayside. Some guys in Germany heard about this. They looked at it and go, oh, you know what? We make great watches. We make really good clocks. We can make that work. And during World War II, the Germans did create the first successful Voith boat, which was a coastal monitor. And all it did is it pushed out, pushed in. It didn't travel. It just kind of pushed out, pushed in, and hid. Unfortunately for them, it's a slow-moving target. It was an easy one for the Allies to take out. So it didn't survive. But the technology did, because they were trying to progress it into some battleships and stuff. End of the war, the information's still out there. A company called Voith Schneider got a hold of this and looked at it and said, we can put a commercial application to this stuff. So they developed this, and they took Professor Kirsten's information and perfected it. In the 1950s, the Europeans started building these very powerful tugs in smaller packages that can maneuver like a helicopter. Foss Maritime, that years down the road, learns about this. Like, we need to be innovators. We need to be a leader. So they invested in the Henry, the Weedle, the America, the Pacific, and boy, I can never remember the fourth one of the family name. So I apologize about that. But that's what this boat became. This is a model of the Weedle Foss. The advantage of the voice system on these boats. If you've ever seen the big tugs, the Garth and Lindsay that are more commonly seen out here at the harbor, these boats had the ability to slide sideways, go backwards, forwards, 45-degree angle, go down a line and do donuts and keep a straight line. All because of that drive system. It gives them a massive amount of maneuvering in very tight places that you can't do with a conventional tug. So as a modeler, I'm thinking, that's cool. That's what we call a techno boat. Technology at its finest, I gotta have one of these things. It sounds good until you start trying to build it and run it. Trust me, I'd rather be running this than this most days, but this is fun to run. It is a challenge. And when you talk to the guys on the rowboat, they tell you it's a challenge. It's not an easy, you don't just jump in it and run it like a little car. Move ahead a few years. The early 2000s, Foss Maritime's realizing the ships are getting bigger. They're getting more weight to them. We need to spend a whole lot of money for some more powerful tugs. And we have an option. We can spend $30 million for one new tug, or we can drop $3 million into a new design on an old boat and make that work. Because if you understand the modern economics, the container ships and all are getting much bigger. And because they got bigger, the port shrank. Not physically, but just you got a bigger project, bigger item going into a smaller package, and even smaller package with more horsepower to move it. So Foss sent some guys to Holland, and what they came back with their design team was what's called the Tricycle Tug. And that's where this finally gets a real prop. This boat not only does it have the Voith drives, it has what's called a Z drive on it. You now have 3 motors on one boat. It gives this boat a lot more power, a lot more maneuverability, but it also gives them cost savings. They only use the Z drive when they're in tight quarters maneuvering because it does create some drag when you're running. The Voith drives pull a boat through water, where conventional boats push a boat through water. So when you're pulling a boat through water and you got something down there, hang it down there, it wants to slow you down because there's like a giant anchor behind you. It causes some issues. So they don't run it because of the slippage in the water flow. A whole lot of science stuff going on. It's just not practical to run it that way. That's why they don't run those at the same time. But when they're in close quarters, you can take this boat, which is 95 foot long, turn those guys on, turn this guy on, and this boat, 95 foot long, is now going 6 knots sideways through the water. That's a lot of horsepower. That's a lot of braking power. Why is braking power so much? Exxon Valdez. These boats need to be able to take these tankers and stop them in less than a mile. Now, when you think about the size of a tanker and how much weight is there and how fast it's going at 10 knots, that's a whole lot of pulling to stop. How these boats do it, and we practice this with the models. They come to a 45-degree angle on the stern of the boat. If the boat is out of control, they fire up all the engines, and they bury this bulwark into the water, literally. The water will be halfway up this house. This boat cannot sink, in theory. None of the Voith boats have ever sunk to this day. The reason being because of the counteractive rotation on the drives that pull it back down at all times. But when you take that and you start to use it as a giant scoop and a giant board in the water, that's how you stop these big tankers at a rapid pace. So once again, I had to do the model, update the model to the more modern version with a Z drive down there. And it was tricky enough to run before. Now you throw a third engine there, I only have 2 hands. It gets to be a challenge. And the hard part for me as a modeler, as fun as this is when it's running good, I get done running this, I literally have to stop for about 10 minutes before I jump onto another model because I have to retrain my brain. It's that complex at times. So, but it is a cool model. It's a great boat. They're really interesting. Local history. And for those who don't know, for ladies in the audience, if you think women have only been starting companies for the last 50, 60 years, Foss Maritime was started by a woman back in 18... I got to do my math real quick here. About 1890. Thea Foss stayed at home while her husband went off to build houses down in South Sound. And while he was busy, gone for weeks at a time building houses, she bought a couple rowboats. And this is back in the day of sail. So in order to get people from the shore to the boat, you rowed them out there and you rowed them back. And some motors came along, they put motors on it. Well, she started doing this trading up. Next thing you got the Foss Launch and Skiff Company. And now they're starting to have small tugs. He's still out there trying to build houses, thinking he's the man of the house, but the reality is they had it going on. She figured this out real quick. So, yeah, she was an innovator, and that company is now a worldwide company. All started from a woman who saw a need and filled it. So, there's more than just tugboats in the history of this area. If you lived here in Bellingham long enough, you know about the history of Uniflight. They started off as United Boat Works, and then later became Uniflight. And the most recognizable boat that they ever built was for that little conflict called Vietnam. It was called a PBR. They were not the originators of it. The original design idea was from a guy in Alabama who approached Congress and said, I can build you a real fast, compact boat that can get your people in and out for a good price. About the time he signed the contract, he passed away. Well, Art Nordvet and a few other guys at the Uniflight plant said, hey, you know what? We already got something like that. We can make this work. And they did. And that's where this little guy comes in. This is my 1/18th scale version of the PBRs. Fiberglass boat that was designed to go up and down the rivers in Vietnam, provide support, do whatever they had to do. There's a lot of stories out there, some good, a lot not so good, but they did the job. They were fast. They used jacuzzi pumps. In other words, they don't have props on the outside. They have big jet drives in the back where they pump water up and shoot it out the back end. That allows them to run in very shallow water. These boats ran in about 2 feet of water or less. Try to do that with your bayliner. It just doesn't work well. They were fast, agile boats. They came in 2 series, the Mark I and the Mark II. The Mark I series was flat on the back end. They wanted a little more length, so they lengthened it, cut it in a bit, and give a little more room for the nozzles to be protected, and they came up with the Mark II, which that is what this version is. Now, unfortunately, I didn't actually build this one. This is what's called a ready-to-run model. What I did, I enhanced it and made it correct. Out of the box, it's really cool looking. I'm a scale guy. It wasn't scale-like. It didn't meet the parameters of being a scale-like model. It didn't look quite right. The other part of it, I grew up in Bellingham. I knew of the history of these boats. I've known guys that had gone out and tested them back then. One of my ex-girlfriends from back in high school, Dad was testing these boats, and he told me some cool stories. But there's also time, I did a lot of work here for the Bellingham Maritime Museum. It was over on Cornwall with Mike Granite and company, and we had these there. And I had the opportunity to talk to several gentlemen who served on these during the Vietnam conflict and hear their stories about it. And since then, I've always been compelled. I needed to have a PBR in my fleet to honor those guys who served on these things and remember the people who built them here in town. I had planned on building one, but you know, when a company comes out with one that's right out of the box, looks good, ready to go with all the things I need it to do, Merry Christmas. So that's what this is. It is a neat little boat. It does run. Like I said, these are all radio controlled. This boat runs. It runs fast. But it's like that boat there is a learning curve. There's no rudder back there. It doesn't back up well. But on a straight run, it looks really cool. So this is the PBRs. Like I said, these are probably the most well-known boat in Bellingham's history. There are others, but this one I think is more recognizable. Off to the side here, that boat is not mine. That boat belongs to my good friend Tom down here in the front. A couple of months ago, Tom was looking at doing something with the boat, and he says, "Hey, I want to make this fish biting boat. Do you think you can help me out?" I help my friends out. Yeah, no problem. So Tom was kind enough to bring it up here. I don't just build the boats, but all the parts on it. The parts you see for the fish biting process up on top was all scratch built in about 3 weeks. Very short amount of time. And it was all built from pictures. So it looks the part. I think Tom's been pretty happy with it so far. I was happy doing it. I actually built 2 sets. That's the better set. My set's still at home, waiting for the project down the road someday. But that's the kind of thing I like to do. That's something you can go down the harbor and actually find that equipment. I can even tell you what boat that came off of. That came off a boat called the Steelhead. That's their equipment. So I copied them. There's no copyright infringement to worry about because it's public access. The other little boat you see up front is a little sailing skiff. That's another one of Tom's boats, where we actually pull the net off the deck and set up a purse like you would with a purse seiner. How big? What, 20 foot of net? 40 feet of net that we pack on the boat and pull off. Usually in a 30-foot pool, and it takes all 30 feet to make that happen. That's some of the fun stuff that we get to do as scale modelers. You know, we make them look good, we make them run, but the other half is making them do what they can do in real life. My purse seiner, which is in the other room there, was one of the first ones to roll out a net. There's 20 feet of net on that boat that would actually roll out by remote control. I hit a button and it would roll off. Or at least I hoped it rolled off most of the time. I did a few shows down in Anacortes with some commercial fishermen watching, and I backlashed. This guy goes, "Hey, he backlashed, just like the other guy over here." You know, I won't mention names because I don't want to get in trouble with them. But we mimic him, not intentionally, but some of the same stuff will happen in miniature that will happen in full size. Just, it's the nature of the beast. We're doing it in miniature. The big difference there is they're hands-on right then and there. I have to react to what it's already done. So when it would backlash, it'd be like, "Oh no." So hopefully stop it, get it back in, undo it, then finish the set. The last model I'm going to talk about is one of the most recognizable style of fishing boats in the Pacific Northwest. That is the Delta 58s. If you've ever been involved in commercial fishing, you know what I'm talking about. These boats came around in the early 70s, originally designed for fishing for tuna down to Mexico. They were fiberglass, they were fast, they could take heavy seas, and they were good boats to fish on. Well, a bunch of them were supposed to go to Mexico, and that deal fell through, so Delta started making deals to commercial fishermen going to Southeast Alaska. And they started snagging them up, and next thing you know, other guys want them, and next thing you know, they have a big booming business. It was probably one of the largest revolutions in boat history for commercial fishing in the Pacific Northwest. Before then, you had your standard long, skinny wooden hull, anywhere from 50 to 60 foot. If you're going to Alaska, it had to be limited to 58 foot. They kind of say, you can't be any too big, we don't want you to go up there and take everything because you've got the biggest boat. So this is what a Delta 58 looks like. It's not 100%. I'll attest to that. I found some mistakes afterwards I didn't catch when I made it. I built this boat in roughly 8 months. I've never built a boat to this detail in that short a time. I just had a whole lot of time on my hands at the time. It is built on a boat that is moored right now down at the harbor. The actual boat's the Misty Moon. And the boat is 40 years old, and it's that shiny. The year I decided to build it, they just gotten it back from the shipyard where they spent a whole lot of money re-gel coating, repainting, making it look like a yacht. Well, I have some people in the world that tell me, your boats need to be dirty, they need to be scuffed up. Well, fishing boats aren't clean, they're dirty. So I decided, oh yeah, watch this. So that's why I built this model. It's a polished boat, very clean, maintained clean, and it looks more like a yacht than a fishing boat most of the time. The model is not scratch built. Now you guys might have heard me talk about these terms, scratch built and stuff. Scratch built means you start with a set of drawings like this. My able-bodied assistant can help me, please. That's my able-bodied assistant, Pam, folks. This is how a scratch-built boat starts, with a set of drawings. This once again is for a 50-foot tabletop Pursaner off the H.C. Hansen plans. I thought I was getting a 58-footer, but I misread the markings on the book and ordered the 50-foot instead of the 58-foot. That's okay. It's still an old Saner. I like it. It's going to get built. When? I can't tell you. So this is how they start. General drawings. Gives me a good overall idea of what a boat looks like. And these are copies from the original builder's plans. The other set. Thank you.
I'm going to stand on the other side.
There you go, right there. This is the important stuff. This has my hull lines, my side view, my top view, my berthing plans. This is all the same stuff that a real shipbuilder uses. Now I have the advantage. I don't have to sit there and take numbers off here and put it on the floor and draw a really big pattern. I can just make a photocopy and go to Kinko's. That's my lofting company. Then I can start cutting parts out to start building a hull. And the same with the house. I can take copies of it and build from that. A lot of work, but with a lot of work comes a lot of reward. That's how you build a scratch-built boat. So the Misty Moon is not built like this. I cheated. I was, once again, down at a hobby show, and one of the persons at the hobby show had a model for sale, a fiberglass hull for sale, and it just so happens to be the same hull that's in the other room. And that boat was supposed to kind of look like this, but that boat was built way back in the early to mid-'80s. I've learned a few things since then. I know how to modify, I know how to work with fiberglass, I know how to change it, manipulate it, and manipulate parts to get it to look like I want it to. So this boat became what it is by a whole lot of cutting, grinding, sanding, cutting, grinding, sanding, cutting, grinding, sanding. Finally get some paint on there, and sanding, painting, and sanding. Yeah, you got the picture. It's a lot of work, but it was good work. And you don't get something like this from just throwing it together. It does take some time and effort to make it. A lot of the parts in this boat, though, are scratch built. I built them off pictures. I spent a lot of time down by the boat, but not on the boat. Photo book up here shows pictures of the actual boat. You can kind of look at it and compare things. That's how I literally had to build things on this boat. It's fully electric, got the lights on. I'm not going to turn the motor on. It makes a spinny thing on back, goes spinny, spinny, and the flopper flop. Not real exciting, trust me. So this is the Misty Moon. Like I said, this is one of probably the greatest model I have built to date. I do have others on the plans. It's part of what I do for fun. Yeah. Part of being a modeler is I'm a self-professed collector. I'm a junk collector. I see something like, ooh, that's got a purpose. Ooh, bunch of pill bottles. All right, put them over here. I've got a use for it. I don't know what it's used for now. I know I got a use for it. You see things differently. Most people look at a can of something and go, oh, there's garbage. I'm looking at it, there's something there. I know it. I just can't see it yet. So I do create parts out of stuff that ordinary, everyday things and disguise it. When you're a modeler, you become part magician. My job is to become an illusionist and sell you that that's the real thing. And if I can do that and take a picture and show you a picture, and you say, wow, that real boat, where's that boat moored at? What harbor? I tell them it's a model, and they're like, no. I say, yeah. I know I've done my job. And that is the thrill that I get from modeling. He said, all my models are mine, are done that way just to be fun. But
Do any of them have bilge pumps?
currently, no. I have had some that have fire monitors on them that became bilge pumps in the wrong direction. I had a fireboat that, like I said, the same year I ran this one, man, it was a bad year at an event in Vancouver. This boat took forever, and that boat was trying to sink itself. I wasn't sure if I made it mad. I decided I wanted to drown or not, but it was full of water because my fire pump had cut the pump to the outside outlet popped loose, and I did not see that when I put the batteries in there. So I'm out there running, and the boat just kept getting lower and lower and lower. I'm thinking, that just doesn't look right.
I'm not sure I have the terminology right. Is that called a Z drive on that FOSS?
Back here?
Z, yeah.
Yes.
Is that swivel or is it stationary?
That swivels.
Okay.
Yeah. The Z drives are unique in that they're also the other power source you see in a lot of the tug companies go to. Voice drives are kind of limited because they require this hull shape to work. You cannot put that drive system on a conventional tug hull and expect it to work because of the water flow and all this other stuff. So they're very unique to this. One of our supporters and sponsors, supporters for our model tug event is Western Towboat, and they build their boats in-house, and they build them with Z drives, big and little. And they're quite powerful, they're very maneuverable, and, because of where they go up to they work for LTL and run the barge lines from Seattle to Alaska and out into the islands. And if you know anything about the weather up there, it's not the happiest of weather most times a year, and they run year-round. So these boats have to be very powerful to move these big 400-foot barges full of containers, food, equipment, into these harbors and hold them there until they get unloaded and then get them back out in a very narrow area. So that's why you see a lot of companies going with a Z drive. They can do the same thing as the voice drive, but it carries more direct power. You have the ability to do thrust vectoring like you would on a jet aircraft. You compress the water, you can aim where that water is going. Makes it real maneuverable. Any other questions? If I don't have a good answer, I can make up a really good lie. Thank you.